What's up, guys? This is Isaiah from Games, and this will be episode number 9 for our Gaimoria Dev stream. Friday, I worked on the map thing here, this game design map. Talked about collectibles and the reason why I kind of put how many in each zone and everything, and general ideas for how I was going to break up the map and how everything flowed. You can see some of this is different and new, and I'll get to that in a moment. But so that's what we did Friday, and I did a little bit of touch up on Anaya's up run animation to kind of get that thing wrapped up so that she has all of her run stuff done. And I said today I was going to get on to doing some like painting for the environments and props and all that, but I might do that a little bit at the end, because I think it would be a good idea for me to do at least 2 to 3 episodes of the same content, just for like consistency's sake, to make it feel like the episodes kind of flow into one another, rather than me doing, one episode is this, one episode is that, one episode is this. And so if you're just interested in learning something specific, it'd be really chaotic for you to, or anyone else, to just want to like watch a video and then, hope that the next one was kind of same content and the next one was same content, so you could learn a bunch in a couple episodes, rather than me doing like one episode, as I just said, one of this, one of that. So I'm actually gonna continue with this thing, and I started writing this stuff out, so I'll talk about that. And I was never a full-time game designer. I was always an artist, but game design has always been a love and passion of mine, and that's why I play so many video games, and that's why a lot of people play so many video games, is because they enjoy the design aspect. So I'm going to talk about like encounters. That's what this stuff is, like enemy types. And just from what I've learned from being at Sucker Punch and Bungie, and then my own experiences within games of what makes interesting encounters and what does not make interesting encounters, ranging from just regular mobs to bosses. And I'll try and bring up a couple examples for like, classic games and current games. And I'll probably bring up like Dark Souls and Diablo, and then like classic Zelda games, Secret of Mana. So I'll have kind of a broad range of things to talk about, or even Infamous, the way that they actually designed, like they use these terms too, like rook, knight, pawn. So I'll talk about like how that works and why it works to make things interesting. So let's see here. I'll start with the additions I made to the map, and you can see that I added these big red demon circles that have a very high difficulty. You can see like the difficulty goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 8. That's because I have this little note thinking that the access to the demon zones will be progress locked. So this will be somewhat Zelda-like, where in Zelda you always kind of have these like 3 items you have to get at the start, and once you get those first 3 items, and that kind of unlocks like the dark area, or like the dark world or whatever. So I'm just gonna make sure our stream is gone. That would suck if I'm just talking and I didn't actually push my stream button properly. So anyways, I'm kind of thinking about doing the same thing here. So, Anaya's always in the central area when she starts, but then you have like a major boss fight in the 3rd section for each of the zones. So there's one for the Fluid, Ember, and Storm, and then, as I had said last time, that this would be optional. So this would be mostly for you to power up and get all your stuff. And you can see the difficulty in this zone matches the difficulty here, and I might bump that up to like a 9. But then you also have to kind of account for the kinds of people that won't go into this optional zone to get all these power-ups, so you can't have it be like too crazy. So I'll just leave it at 8. But anyways, what I was saying with Zelda is like you'll go into each of these zones and you'll essentially defeat the boss, and when you have defeated all 3 bosses, they'll be, or these demon zones will all become unlocked at the same time. And the player will be able to go to whichever one they choose first. I'm zooming around a lot. I'll zoom out. And then as the player like clears out these demon things, that would pretty much be the end of the game, right? That's kind of how Zelda works. As I said, you know, you collect the 3 things, you can go to the Dark World, and then in Zelda you have like 6, 7, or 8 temples within the Dark World, and once you beat the boss in the Dark World, then the game's done. So yeah, this is kind of like what I'm imagining the progress for the game to be, is the player would, you know, go to each of these zones, beat each of the bosses, they'd be able to do it in the order that they want, and then once they've completed that, then they would unlock the demon temples, and then they would complete the demon temples in the order that they want, and then probably have some final boss, and the game's over. So there's not, well, I can talk about what I have like written for the zones. So as we have like Ember, Fluid, and Storm, the zones are going to be different, right? So Ember is going to be like fiery, volcano, desert kind of stuff. Storm zone will be like windy, rainy, up in the cliffs, lightning, and all that kind of cool stuff. And then Fluid, of course, like water-based. So I wanted the demon temples to have their own individual feel. Like they'll all be really creepy, demony kind of stuff, but they'll have a theme, so that way you know you're not in the same like demon zone as for this one to this one and that to this. So I might actually just color coordinate these circles a little better. But so the idea for here, I have like demon zone darkness, and so the zone design elements is, you know, tight light radiuses, tortures. You'll see creatures' eyes and teeth in the dark. So it'll be kind of like playing off of the strong light and dark aspect of creepy demon stuff. This one won't be dark, because that's what this one's about. So this one will be more about the creepy crying and moaning and screaming stuff. And I actually tried to think of ways to tie these into the zones that they're actually connected to as well. So the reason I have this screaming, moaning, crying thing attached to the storm zones is because in Storm you can kind of hear the moaning of the wind through the caves and through the trees. It's all really creepy audio stuff. So to me, thinking of like the moaning and crying of the wind through nature naturally progresses into like a demonic moaning and crying, screaming kind of place. And the same with this is like the idea of darkness and torches and light radiuses comes directly from light, and lava and fire and stuff in the Emberlands emits light, and so the idea here is like this is kind of the opposite of an area that has a lot of fire and light, and there's only a little bit of fire and light. And then the final one is the demon zone of blood, and we're pretty much all made up of water, and so to me that just made me think of blood and like kind of like rivers and waterfalls in this area and stuff, but it'd be kind of the same, except it would all be red. So that would be, you know, creepy in its own. I think that's all I have to say about that. So I'll just kind of go into this like enemy types thing I was thinking of. And I'll do some actual work on the map too, because I'm going to be adding some of this and putting more notes down, and because as I said last time, this map is mostly for my own reference, and so that when we get into building the world, I have this big thing that I can go back to use as a frame of reference for notes of like, okay, so what was I thinking about enemies in this area, or what was I thinking about like the environmental hazards would be for this area. So as I said, this is just like a big visual note-taking tool. So the whole like idea behind the chess pieces being representations for the enemies in the game is because it's exactly how they are in chess. In chess, for example, the pawn can only move one unit forward or two at the start, and they can only attack things diagonally in front of them. And that's why you have a bunch of them, because they're relatively weak and they have very minimal function. They don't do a whole lot. They're kind of stupid. So you abstract this idea of the pawn on the chessboard, and you can convert that into something for game design, and you think of the pawns are, simple units, and they keep the player engaged so that you aren't running around in dead space. Actually I'll launch a ROM here. And I officially own this game, so I can own a digital copy, so I'm not doing anything illegal here. I own Secret of Mana. This one. I think I have some cheats loaded too, that way I was able to just kind of run through the game, and because I was just using this as a way to like go around and look at stuff. And I hope this isn't too loud, because I haven't actually done like gameplay stuff. So some of these creatures would be pretty strong pawns. Can't really see it because my guys are just kicking ass too much, but they're pretty simple. They just kind of walk at you. I'll tell my characters to stop. I'm basically going through these settings right now, and this was actually really cool to me. I'm gonna try and drop the sound down a little bit just in case. So this was on Super Nintendo, obviously, but you could actually control very basic AI for your character. You could have them be extremely aggressive, or you could have them be very defensive. So, you could have them stay away and attack, that means they'd be ranged. You could have them approach and attack, that means they're melee. Or they could approach and guard, which means not a whole lot in this game, but it means they wouldn't attack much, and then if they keep away and guard, that means they'll pretty much just stay away and run. So you can see, now they're not fighting at all. Well, they will every now and then, but they aren't going to be as crazy with attacking. So now I can talk about this wolf thing. These wolves are pretty basic units. They just kind of walk around. They don't really hurt you unless you get too close. They have some chase mechanics. So these are kind of like pawns for this era, and in Super Nintendo there wasn't a whole lot of extreme diversity in the kind of AI that they could write for things, so most things just kind of acted like pawns, where they just kind of mindlessly walk around and then attack you every now and then. So let's see here, what else can I pull up for... So that's enough for a pawn. Talk about, what's the next one? A swarmer. No worries, you're not too late. I actually started at 4:30, so you're only about 10 minutes late. This was a very busy day. I needed that extra 30 minutes just to like eat something before I started streaming. I was just talking about units in games and why certain units work certain ways, and I just kind of explained the pawn, and now I was going to move on to a swarmer. So, a swarmer is obviously not a part of a chessboard. But usually what swarmers are is they're usually considered pawns in games, but in like Diablo, there is actually a difference between their pawns and their swarmers, and they actually have, I think they're actually called swarmers, or swarms in Diablo 3. To where I have this handy dandy little blank sheet that I can illustrate this stuff to you guys too. This will be a very interesting episode, very different from the rest, of course, because I'm just going to talk about game design. So if we have Anaya over here, oops. Okay. So we have Anaya here. You guys are pets. So, let's see, our pawn is just kind of like... Cool. What's up, Andy? So, as I said, a pawn, I'll just kind of illustrate it in the chess pieces too. So a pawn is kind of a stupid unit. It just kind of like will walk towards you, and then it'll just like attack, and then it'll kind of wander, and it might wander back and attack. Swarmers, on the other hand, is like tons and tons and tons of really weak units. And as I said, some games use them as pawns, or they use the pawns as the swarmers, but to me I think there's a different function to them. And the swarmers usually don't have like a wander in, attack and wander out, or wander off and come back and attack kind of mentality. They usually just go all ham. They're just like all in all the time, going at you crazy, like super aggressive. A really easy way to think of this is like disturbing a bee's nest, which is also why, you know, you could kind of think of bees or hornets or whatever also kind of pawns, because there are hornets by themselves that will kind of fly around and they'll annoy you, but then they'll fly off. But then if you go and you kick the freaking hornet's nest, you know, you're gonna have a bad time. So don't kick a hornet's nest. But this is basically what happens when you kick a hornet's nest, is they all just get super aggressive and they all charge you as fast as they can and attack you as much as they can. So while that can do a lot of damage and it applies a lot of pressure to the player, the main counter to it is to just be aggressive and fight it back. You can see I have this like strengths and weaknesses of them. So the weaknesses of swarmers is like AoE damage. You know, if you could summon in a fireball like this and it would blast a whole bunch of them, so that would take out like half the swarmers right there, and then you only have a couple more. Then you just summon down another one, hit those ones, and then you took out all those, and then you just have one crappy little swarmer here and you take care of it. Whereas and they all have really low health, so it's really easy to kill them that way. Whereas with a pawn, you know, you could hit them with an AoE spell, but they have more health, so it's like, what's the point of using an AoE spell? You could, but it's no better than doing something a little more direct. So there's just different design mentalities behind it. I'll just put a little note here. And I'll put this in its own layer. We'll talk about that for a sec. And so these like HP and damage things was just kind of notes to myself for when we eventually get to the point of making the creatures. Of how much damage I'd want them to do and how much I'd want them to take before they die. And we're thinking of very basic numbers. You can see like a boss has an HP of 30, and like rooks have a 5 to 10. And that's because I'm thinking way more like just a Zelda kind of way, where it's an action adventure and not so much an RPG where you're doing, you know, 20 or 30 damage per hit based off of your equipment, based off of the enemy's defense, blah blah blah. Whereas Zelda is just straight to the point, like you hit something and it dies in 2 hits, always. Or or like when something hits you, you always take a certain amount of damage to your hearts. So these numbers are relative to something you would be accustomed to in a Zelda game, or like with Binding of Isaac. Binding of Isaac, of course, was directly influenced by Zelda. Like the whole dungeon, it's exactly like a Zelda clone, except it's procedural. So yeah, that's my just own personal notes of things. And then strength of a pawn. They don't really have any strengths, but you know, if there's a whole bunch of them and you ignore them, then yeah, they can become a problem. It's kind of the idea of like a single walking zombie. They're not much of a threat on their own, but they're a threat if you turn the corner and there's like 500 of them, and then you're basically going to get swarmed. Whereas with the swarmer, you know, they're always just going to be running at you, so you have to attack them. So enough about those two. The rook is could be a tank. Usually is pretty tough, and they're usually also very aggressive, like a swarmer. So you think of like a football player, or like a really big knight. Like a gorilla. There we go. This is my cute gorilla. Such a friendly gorilla. I think that's cool. So anyways, like, a rook would be something that's pretty tough. You know, you see like a big gorilla, especially relative to his size to Anaya's. He's kind of big, and you're like, whoa, that guy's buff. But they're usually not too smart, and they kind of just... They'll often do just like a charge attack. And they'll just kind of charge at you, and you can kind of dodge and roll out of the way. But they have a lot of health, so this is where it starts getting into why you would have certain enemies paired with other enemies to make the fight interesting. Because you wouldn't just want to create a play space that has a bunch of gorillas, because then you're just... Well, I mean, you could. There's always exceptions to the rule, blah, blah, you know. So yeah, you could have a bunch of gorillas and they're all charging you, and the whole point of it is to like dodge around a lot and try and kill the gorillas. But with this being balanced with the other ones, so you have this rook who's kind of a tank. He has like 5 to 10 HP. I cherish. So he has like 5 to 10 HP, which relative to the other ones is like, you know, several of these, several of those. So he would take a while to actually kill. And the way that these work best is when you have knights, or what is labeled as a knight, which is usually the high DPS, and they can be either like archer range or like a caster that shoots fireballs, or they could be like a... Then, you know, it won't be the same. What this does is if you throw in the rook with a couple of knights... See here. Let's have some, like, parrots. Keep the jungle theme going. That's an angry parrot. And the way every studio uses these terms would be different, so, you know, if you actually work at a large studio and you see this, then, you know, it won't be the same. So, as I was saying, the knight is the damage dealer. And you can use the example from Donkey Kong Country... Well, I guess 1 and 2. There's parrots that actually will, like, spit eggs at you. So, that's an example of someone that will do like a lot of damage with their attack, but they're ranged. And so what makes this fight engaging and difficult is you start adding a couple of knights. Oh. So say you have like 3 birds, and those things are all chucking eggs at you. You're gonna have a hard time trying to damage the rook because he has so much health, while these things are chucking eggs at you. So this is where it starts to change the priority on the battlefield of what you should be fighting, and it's obvious that if you're trying to fight the rook, who has tons of health and is always going to be in your face, you're probably actually going to get killed by the knights that are spitting their eggs at you from ranged. So what a better strategy is to do your best to avoid the rook and go and engage the parrots who have considerably less health, you know, like a third of the health if, you know, these are just references. Say they have like, you know, a third of the health, so it's a better idea to run up and kill these high damage knight units before really dealing with the rook if possible. That way you can clear the battlefield of the hazards and the high damage that they output, and then while avoiding the rook. So then once you kill the knights, you can then kill the rook with much more safety, because you won't have to be avoiding him and avoiding all the egg-spitting parrot knights. And then the last one is the bishop. And the bishop is kind of the support dude. Support. Say like a little shaman or something. Up Supreme DDT. Yep. That's some kind of thing. So this is considered like the bishop unit. And so now what makes this even more challenging is the bishop, as you can see in the notes. The bishop doesn't really do any damage. Sure, they might throw a little something out every now and then, but it doesn't really do anything. Their main strength is aiding their allies and making them stronger. So you'll have the rook that's in your face, you'll have the knights that are trying to shoot you from range, and then you'll have the bishop in the back that's like casting shields on the units or something. Or increasing, like, giving this guy like a speed up ability. And he's also relatively weak. So he also becomes an extremely high priority target. Because now you have to avoid the rook, you have to avoid the eggs from the knights, you have to try and kill the knights because they're the ones that are going to be doing a lot of damage. But then you also are going to want to try to get to the bishop because he's the one that's making everyone else stronger. So it might be a good idea for you to just like dodge out of the way of the rook, dive way back into the back, take care of the bishop, and then start killing the knights, and then kill the rook. So I hope that's starting to kind of make sense of like the different kinds of units on the field and what they do, and then being able to create engaging fights around the world with that. And then the queen thing is just like a boss unit, and I won't get into that because boss fights are usually pretty unique. I think probably the best thing I would have to say about the queen or the boss fights is it's usually pretty cool to have a boss fight that has these other units participating, because so on this map you're going to be fighting these kinds of enemies in like 1, 2, and 3. I My allergies are super freaking bad today. Uh, that's why I'm kind of like stop talking and stuff, because my head like starts feeling like that. Um, so yeah, you have these 1, 2, and 3 zones, and aside from just having slightly more difficult pawns in each area, the pets. My idea is yes, like you. The idea is the Ember pet will be more of like a rook, like he's a little more tanky, which is why I have it called Ember and it's not fire, because Ember means that there can be like stone and stuff involved. So that kind of makes you think like, okay, the Ember pet is kind of tanky, so your Ember pet will be like an in-your-face pet. And then that's also why I had these as birds, because Rang, the Storm pet, will kind of be like the long-range damage dealer that'll shoot out like lightning strikes or like dive in and attack things. And then your water pet will pretty much be the Bishop, who can like heal or shield or speed you guys up, but he can also do a little bit of attacking. So yes, that's kind of the idea of it too. And then Anaya is kind of Anaya would actually kind of be like a pawn, because I wouldn't want Anaya herself to be able to do so much. Like she'd kind of be like Link in the Zelda games, where she's able to kind of whack things, but that's about it. Which encourages the player to use the whole Rook Knight Bishop with your pets. And especially because they don't have hit points like Anaya does, they can take the damage. And if they, take enough damage to be unsummoned, she can resummon them into the fight. So this all sounds really complex, but it's not too complex. You just kind of design a character with something very specific in mind. Like you would design a gorilla that has a lot of health, and you would make him mostly just charge you. And then he'd charge and he'd kind of pause for a couple seconds, catch his breath, and then he'd charge you again. So beyond that, like his design wouldn't be that complex. With the birds, you could have them kind of move around, and then if you get within range, they'll start chucking eggs at you, and then, that's about it. And then same with the bishop, might be a little more complex, because at least with like AI, you'd have to teach the bishop like which things to speed up, which things to shield. But really, like the whole system individually is not complex. It's complex when you put them together into the playing field, which makes it interesting. But yeah, what I was going to say with the zones of 1, 2, and 3, you would be fighting probably a lot of pawns here, just so you would start to get familiar with the zone, familiar with like the pawns and what they do, and you probably have like maybe a rook here and there, a knight here and there, but you wouldn't have a whole lot. You'd probably just have like one gorilla in here, or the gorilla would be in the forest most likely. But anyways, you'd have like a big what I call alligilla. Actually, that's I'll pull that little sketch up. I actually called something an alligilla. And that was the exact same thing that I had in mind. This guy right here, alligilla. So it's kind of like a gorilla, except he's like a big crocodile dude. So he would essentially be the rook for that zone, and you would only see him maybe once or twice in the first zone, because as I said, the whole purpose with the lower difficulty is to introduce the player to the zone. So the next zone is where we would probably have some swarmers, just to kind of break things up. You'd have some of the same pawns, and you'd have probably the same number of like rooks and knights, or maybe a little bit more. But you would start placing them in a way to where the combat is more difficult. And you can do that just with grouping. So, let's say I had like 3 pawns in this little area. This is actually Anaya way down here. Kind of got her to scale. So, let's say Anaya's up. Oops. Let's say you just enter the zone, and you're like right here. When you first enter the zone, you might see like a couple little pawns, and they're just kind of wandering around. You get up close to one, they'll be like, "Hey, what are you doing?" They'll bite you, and then they'll kind of walk away, and you'll be like, "Ow, that hurt." So then you kill it. So what would make Zone 2 more difficult is the grouping would be different. You wouldn't have 3 pawns together. You would maybe have like 2 pawns and a rook, or you would start doing like this here where I was explaining this. This is probably like a zone 3 kind of thing. Like the most difficult for the area. Like the 5 out of 10 difficulty. So this place is where you would start getting into those complex fights, and you would have learned about the individual enemies in these previous zones. You would learn about the pawns, you would learn about the knights and rooks, and some swarmers, and maybe a bishop here or there. Or maybe you just reserve the bishops for this because they're an interesting addition to the difficulty and design for the fights. But this is where, since it's the highest difficulty, you would start combining things in an interesting way. Like you would have your knights and your rook and your bishop, but then you'd also have a couple pawns walking around, and then maybe some swarmers come out of somewhere. So then you're like, you have to dodge enough to avoid the knights. You have to be aggressive enough to kill the swarmers. You have to be careful not to roll into a pawn because the pawn will bite you if you get close to it, all the while trying to avoid the rook and the knights while the bishop is buffing everything. So that's an example of an extremely, extremely hard fight. Just based off of combining the same units that were in the previous zones, but combining them better. So you wouldn't just fight like a whole bunch of pawns, you'd fight them in complex groups. That was a mouthful. I've been like talking non-stop for like 40 minutes. But as I said, like that's kind of a lot of what I had learned being at Sucker Punch and Bungie, and then just kind of watching the design process of how those companies, or you don't even have to have worked there, you just play the game. That's exactly what game design is you play the game, but you don't play it just to have fun and be like, that was cool, I'm done. Like, you play it with the mind of a designer and you think, okay, why is there a creature at this choke point? You know, someone put that creature there for a very specific reason. This is where I was saying, like, Dark Souls is a perfect example because they group their certain kinds of enemies in certain ways in certain spots to make that little section challenging. And then you get better and pass it once you have kind of learned how to avoid the attacks of one to reach the weaker ones in the back. So that's where I'm getting a lot of this information. It's just kind of like experience from playing games, thinking as a designer when you play like Dark Souls, and then just even as I was saying with like Bungie's games like Destiny, if you walk into a group of enemies, they have enemies that are tough, they have ones that are like shielding them, and then they have weaker ones that do a lot of damage. So it's really quite present in all well-designed games. So what I was going to do is I was going to segue that explanation of like why you group things a certain way into actually kind of putting those notes on paper for myself. Because this all sounds fine and dandy when I'm explaining it, but once I get in and I start designing things, you know, I'm not going to remember everything I'm saying right now. So it's best if I just I take my notes and then I visualize it. I put it on a map because I'm a very visual person, obviously. And then I can just refer to the map and be like, oh, I remember when I talked about this. And this is why I thought about grouping things in this way. And then with like these demon zones, because they're so high difficulty, I'm thinking of just throwing all that shit at you all at once. Because it's basically the 3 areas before the end of the game. So anyways, I'm going to save this because it's actually kind of some good notes. I'm going to get a beer, so if you guys have a question about any of that, please ask, and then if there is a question, I'll answer it right when I get back. Also have a butt's always sore. Cushion helps. Or tailbone. Alright, so what I was gonna do is I was actually gonna just break this Google image I found into pieces. I am or my initial idea is she will have them right at the start. Or at least, if not right at the start, like very, very soon. Like you would get them before you even enter all the zones. Or presumably you would. So you might, you'd probably, if you start the game at the very start, you'd probably find like the Ember Pet right at the very beginning, because he's kind of the in-your-face character, so I think a lot of people would understand that. So as you start the game, you probably get him like right here. And then you'd find the other two pets probably like really early, like within the grasslands or the autumn lands. Because I want the complexity of using all your pets to be available from the start. I mean, the combat won't be that complex for the start because, you know, difficulty 1 out of 10, this is just gonna have pawns. You know, it's gonna be exactly like my demonstration with this, like... Right, I used to think about that, but, since I don't want people to depend on Anaya too much... Oh, get over here. If I had the pets in the zones, I mean, but it could all be changed. Nothing I'm saying right now is concrete, so it might be that you find the first pet in, you know, this area. Then you find the first one here and the other one here. So yeah, that might be the case. But I wouldn't want it to be to where you have to go all the way deep in here and fight the boss and then unlock it, because that starts teaching the player that they need to rely on Anaya more than their pets. And the earlier that the player gets their pets, the more likely they're going to be to experiment with them. I want to make it very clear early in the game that Anaya is very weak, and she's only able to like kind of whack things around with her flute or her instrument. And that's kind of why the difficulty in these areas is so low, and why it would be mostly just filled with pawns, because that gives the player, if they have the pets early on, the chance to use their pets in a relatively safe environment. Like, if you just have a couple caterpillar enemies that kind of just wander around, you can safely test out a couple of your pet's abilities and see how good you are at landing them and if they're connecting and all that. But if you're like way balls deep in difficulty 5 out of 10 already, that's like half as difficult as I'm expecting the end game to be. It'll just be too overwhelming to get a pet so late and then try to start learning how to use their pet immediately when dealing with fights like this. Where I had explained, like, I'm thinking the final zones will have these really complex fights. So, we'll see when we get there. but erring on the side of get them sooner, much sooner. Just kind of tweaking the things myself. Actually, just it's very apparent that it's like the boss. Sorry. When we went on our little road trip, all my allergies went away very quickly. Surprise, surprise, when we get back, headaches and sinus problems all come back first day we're here. Like, even when we land, yeah, you might have a bit of a headache just from, like, traveling and sitting on a plane and all that, but didn't go away for 3 days, and now I'm just, back to the same old sinus issue stuff. That's one of the things I've thought about. And that's something that will just require lots of playtesting when we get there. I had initially thought about, yeah, like the fluid pet would be more effective in the Ember Zone. You know, having complex weakness and strength mechanics in the game, just like Pokemon, or any game really, but very noticeable in Pokemon, like water is super effective against fire, etc., etc. So that's something that I will just have to try. One for Swarmers. About right. There. That'll be our Swarmer. So it's down here. So I'm gonna. The reason I'm doing this is, as I said, I want to start making these notes. Into something that I can refer to later. So I'm gonna just kind of take these things and like put them in and start placing them around the map. in a way that seems to make sense to me. So that later when we get to that point, I could refer to the map as kind of like my go-to thing for design-related notes. And of course, I'm not going to just have the same. I'm not just going to have one pawn per zone, so it's not going to be like the same little evil frog or evil turtle as a pawn. I'd probably have like 3 to 4 variations just to kind of make it interesting. But I might only have like 1 or 2 versions of the rooks, knights, and bishops. Oh, these are in the wrong spot. Well, it's also pretty accurate. Like, well, unless since you capitalize foot soldiers, if that's something very specific, but uncapitalized, yeah, just foot soldiers, grunts in other games. I mean, even Halo, their thing was called a grunt, right? They're kind of like weak little scrubby dude. Yeah, the grunt. It's a pawn. It's the same thing. It's like the first unit you ever come across in Halo is a grunt. And they're stupid, they're scared, they run around and they just shoot you with weak guns, and you can go up and pretty much kill them in 1 melee hit. So, exact same idea. Exact same game design mechanic. And then you have the, oh, what's the other ones called? Slightly bigger ones. I feel like the alien race called? Yeah, whatever this guy is. So he's like not a pawn, obviously. Yeah, foot, right, foot. The foot, I think they're called. Yeah, they're basically all pawns. And then you have like Bebop and Rocksteady are like rooks. Shredder's obviously the boss. I don't know too much about the lore, but same exact thing. Like the Ninja Turtles could kick a whole bunch of ass against a bunch of pawns because that's all they're good at, like coming in and trying to attack a little bit, and swarming, same thing. And then you have Bebop and Rocksteady that are pretty, tougher because they're rooks. So this is all same mentality or same design philosophy. So what I'm doing is just going to use this as reference. So I was thinking like 3 forms of pawns. Same here. 3 forms of pawns. So the 3 pawns are consistent throughout the zones. Can throw in like one swarmer. One rook. Actually, this is a little easier to deal with. Rooks make things a lot harder. So, keep the rook for here. Put the knights here. And then we're going balls deep here. So, we're going to have rook, the bishop, and the knights. We'll probably have like 2 types of knights here. Boss. You'll have swarmers. I'm going to color this one yellow because that means for that zone I plan on making a new one. Golden pony. 40, 60, 10. Remember that. So this will be consistent with the other zones, just so that the players kind of know what to expect, because they're the first 3 zones. They shouldn't be too difficult, or like too drastically different. But I can change up like where swarmers and where pawns would be. Actually, what I could do is there too. So this is actually a good way to kind of just look at how many enemies I'm thinking of making for the game. So if we have a swarmer, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 types of enemies for this fluid area. I just lost track of exactly what I said. Did I say 9? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So excluding the boss, because the boss is unique. Swarmer and Knight. Well, again, this stuff is theoretical, so when I actually get to building the world, units and stuff in them, this may change. But I'm just trying to give I'm thinking about like which one should be where and all that. Like if I go to a new zone, what am I expecting in a new zone? I don't think I should color this. Because if I look at this as notes later, it's going to confuse me. I'm going to be like, wait, was I meaning the gold to be like a strong one or what? So I'll just say like new. War zone. 3. So I'm going to copy these. I'm Gonna copy them all over the place. Have them. So as I was saying, I don't want to have the exact same like new experience for every zone to be exactly the same. So this will, the zone 3s will probably remain consistent for the most part. But maybe like I want to have a large presence of swarmers in the first Stormlands. So that already makes the Stormlands feel very different when you enter, just by the kinds of enemies that'll be there. So maybe I'll actually have like 2 kinds of swarmers and then a pawn. So then when you enter the Stormlands, you know you're going to be fighting like ridiculous amounts of weak enemies that come charging at you. That is inherently different than what I did with the Fluid Lands, which are a bit more balanced. And then, like I could just nix Swarmers entirely here. Or I could have less Swarmers. But it might be interesting to actually just not have Swarmers at all. The progression for this was pretty linear. So I'll try and make it unique. So as here we had 4 enemies, and we had 4 enemies there. We'll probably have enough too. But this, we could have a little different. Four kinds of pawns. Bishop. So again, like, it might seem like I'm making this one more difficult than the other one, but that doesn't really have to be the case. Right. So, you know, that might work really well here, which is where, you know, I might just nix the idea here and actually put it over here to where I have, you know, as you said, tons of mosquitoes. Because this is like a swampy, foresty area. But with the Stormlands, there's thinking that there'd be lots of flying creatures, so it'd be lots of like really weak crows that come charging at you from the trees and stuff like that. Right, exactly. But as I was saying, like, it might seem like that this is more difficult than what I had put here, which is just like only 1 knight and no bishop. But again, it's just a matter of spacing. So like I wouldn't, for this area, I might not have all the enemies in one spot. You know, I'd space them out so that the player could encounter them at a pace that felt like it was okay for the progression of difficulty for the zone. So it might make it more interesting is if there were no rooks here at all in this entire zone. And it's a much more fast-paced, aggressive kind of area, which kind of plays into the theme of it being like windy and lightning, which kind of feels fast. So if we have it with lots of swarmers, and offensive units, and not really have to deal with rooks, what that will make the player have to do is they'll have to play much more aggressively. Whereas with this, you might try to be smart about dodging things, as I said with this little illustration, you know, taking care of things in the back, blah, blah, blah. But imagine you have no rook, you have a bunch of knights, and then you have additional pawns and swarmers. Like, you can already see that the battlefield, just by doing that, is looking way more chaotic. And that's just with adding 2 extra swarm packs and 2 extra pawns. So it may look harder, but if you just use lots of AoE, you'll be killing the swarmer packs a lot faster. So that could, like, that's kind of cool. Earthworms. So if we had like 3 stormer types or swarmer types, probably just like 2 knights. I don't want to be too crazy and think about adding like insane amounts of work by creating so many like new units. So I'm actually going to put a total zone for, let's see here. Total zone. So 3 swarmers, 4 pawns, 2 knights, 2 bishops. This would have a new knight. You can see this whole thing is actually starting to turn out quite beefy. And so that's what's nice about having just tons of notes on this. And because I'm streaming it, I'm talking about it, I'm discussing why things will be, where they will be. When we actually get to start building the world, a lot of this will be kind of figured out already. And we won't have to think as much in the future, as we're kind of front-loading a lot of that thinking process of how we can break up the different kinds of units and all that stuff. Oh, it zoomed in super far. I don't like the idea of having 4 of those. Let's see. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Here we have Uh, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Have this have one more pawn. My idea is, so as I said, this is, or I didn't say this, but as it shows, I have what's written down Grinning Army Boss, and the Grinning Army, if you look through the patron, you'll know that the idea for the initial conflict is basically the bird people, the Avduin, who are kind of like reside in the storm zone. They're kind of at odds with the Grinning Army, who are from the Fluid Lands, because the Grinning Army is kind of being dicks, and they're pushing into like what would be considered neutral territory. So you probably encounter some weaker versions of the Grinning Army in the Grasslands and the Autumn Lands, just to kind of encourage that lore. I am going to write that right now. Box. He isn't taking notes handy. And I could probably like populate the game to have them more down here, because this is where they're at. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah, I was thinking about these. So, the reason why it might be okay to have more pawns here is because the Grinning Army is like a big collection of really stupid, like, amphibians and reptiles. So it'd be kind of cool to have extra pawns for this area, because that just shows that there's a bunch of like dumb, useless units in the Grinning Army's repertoire, or stores of soldiers. They're not very good soldiers. They're just kind of a bunch of grunts. They're a bunch of dummies. So it would be cool if there was like extra pawns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So here I'll write a note. Go to 3 new pawns. 2 to 3 are new pawns. So that means we'll have 3 unique pawns here. We'll take away 2 and add 2 back in. So here we'll stay with 3 pawns, but 2 of the 3 will be unique. And then when we finally get to the Grinning Army zone, or the third zone, we'll have all 5 of the pawns. So now we want to go. We want to save it because that's important. Yeah, my sketchbook is pretty scribbly. Like as I showed you last time, this was just like a bunch of scribbly stuff. I don't know if I gotta pull up OBS. Yeah, so it's just a bunch of scribbly nonsense. That's actually relatively clean for other chicken scratch that I've done, like just something like this. Designing some of the $50 donor things on our Patreon. Pretty scratchy. Oh yeah, so I was going to take this note. This Photoshop doesn't want to run well. So total zone unique enemies will be 1 swarmer, 5 pawns, 2 knights, bishop, rook. Actually, I don't want to have 2 rooks. Especially because we're encountering a rook back here. Right? Oh. Knight, a swarmer. We're going to switch this up a little bit. This is a new knight for zone 2. So that way, what we're having right now is we're having a different... We're having pawn A, B, and C, and knight A. We'll have pawn C, D, and E, and knight B. And when we get here, we have all of them. But I want 2 rooks, because Grinning Army is kind of like a bunch of tough, scrubby, goofy people. So maybe they won't even have a caster, because that's kind of how they are. No, I'm gonna keep... I actually want to show you a sketch I did. I think it's the same one. Oh. There's a really funny sketch I did of this turtle playing the banjo. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. This would totally be... You can see this here. This turtle playing the banjo. That would be the bishop. So he'd be the guy behind the enemy lines, like playing his banjo and giving buffs to the other units. Yeah, it was a freaking hilarious idea. I love it. And he's like sitting there singing hillbilly songs. So I gotta keep this bishop. That's totally what he's gonna be. But I do want another knight, or another rook. So there. So there won't be a whole lot of swarmers. Yeah, I'll pull that up again. I think it's a funny drawing. It's just something I drew on the bus one of the many days coming home. So these are all like Grinning Army units. This guy's like, fucking kids, god damn it. So he'll probably be like a grunt, got some grumpy old turtle, or a grumpy old like frogs. But yeah. Problem with these little beers is I need to go up and get more of them more frequently. Here, 1 swarmer, 5 pawns, 2 knights, 1 bishop, 2 rook. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 total. Exactly, yeah, I used the bard. I think 11 is a fair amount. This one was 10. So this one makes sense too. This has no rooks, because I'm thinking the stuff in the storm zone would be more fast-paced, more spellcasters, more DPS, a little bit more on your toes, like more active dodging and attacking. Whereas this is a little bit more of a tanky area, because you'll have like a bunch of pawns that will soak up some damage, and you'll have 2 kinds of rooks. I'll give it to you. I'll put it on Imager for you. I'll give you a link. Let's see. See. Direct link. Bam, there you go. Now you can save it. So 11 total. So yeah, this is like a tough tanky place. They got 2 rooks, bunch of pawns. So for the Emberlands, I kind of want to hit the same, like 11 types of units. So if the Fluid Lands are lots of tanky people, Stormlands is like fast aggressive. What would Emberlands be? Emberlands could be very few pawns, fewer units, more environmental hazards. So it could be like more knights, bishops. Maybe there's no swarmers. So, because my idea with the Emberlands is I was thinking of these, like molten rocks and stuff rolling down the hills. It's exactly like Zelda, or like when you're in Death Mountain or whatever. The rocks are like rolling down the hill and you gotta dodge and avoid them. And I want to have environmental hazards and stuff in this game. So, and then like how many environmental hazards will also have to play into what kinds of enemies and how many of them there are. So, let's see here. Let's try if I had no swarmers. How many pawns do we have here? 3. So yeah, that's a fast-paced place, so let's get rid of the swarmer. We'll have a balance with just 1 rook and 1 bishop. Maybe we'll have a bunch of knights. So that's very different, right? Maybe. So we have 2 there. But that might also might not play well. Maybe the Emberlands can just kind of be a bit more balanced in general, just without the swarmers. Let's see here, I had 3 pawns and a knight. Let's throw in a bishop at the very start here. That'd kind of mix it up. So we got a bishop in the first zone. But we do like bishop, knight, pawn. It's very different. So the first area will have 1 kind of pawn, 1 knight, and 1 bishop. And then maybe the bishops will be consistent throughout. we'll have going 3 knights. So it could maybe keep it consistent, but just change the unit. So that'll be a new knight and a new pawn. Then they'll have one more new knight and one more new pawn. So have pawn, two, knight for zone 2. Squeeze a little more space. Oh god. This document is so huge already. Just pushing my luck. Okay, I'm gonna get a beer while that does its thing. Pillow's helping my butt a lot, so that's a good thing. My tailbone isn't screaming in agony every time I stand up. Longest crop ever. That's what happens when your document size is 17,000 pixels by 15,000 pixels, or something like that. Pray it doesn't crash. You can do it. Just adding about 400 pixels on the sides. Well, while that's doing its thing, what can I do? Let's see. Game design related stuff. Saved all these cool things of maps. Oh, this was actually our very first version of our idea. You can see it's almost exactly the same. You got your start area. And then, yeah, here you can see we were thinking like you get the first pet in the first zone. So yeah, you'd probably get your pet as you enter the zone. And then we had 1, 2, and 3, and then these like what we called borderlands. And we used to have 4 zones with 4 pets. And we got rid of 1 pet because we thought that would just be too complex. 3 pets is already pretty crazy. And we also needed a button that would directly control Anaya's ability to like swing her stick or whatever. So we got rid of 1 pet, which is why, yay, it did it. Why the like the forest area is optional. So we have new pawn and new knight again. So that's kind of a cool way for a progression for this. This is different than the rest. So the bishop is consistent throughout the whole zone. And then when you go from zone 1 to zone 2, the bishop is the same, but you get a new pawn and a new knight to fight. And then finally, when you get to the final zone, you get all the knights, including a new knight and a new pawn and a rook. So you'll kind of get a taste of it here, you'll get a taste of it here, and then you'll get it all thrown at you here. So what is that? 3, 6, 7, 8 types of enemies. So I want at least like 2 more. Maybe let's see. Maybe we'll do 1 more pawn, and maybe we'll just bring the swarmer back. The swarmers are fun. That'll keep our numbers pretty even. Is that correct? So that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Maybe what we'll do is we'll have that. So you'll have pawn AB, pawn BC, knight A, knight B. Bishop is consistent. So you'll have 1, 2, 3, then a new pawn for zone 3, knight for zone 3. You'll have knight A, B, C, pawn A, B, C, D, and a swarmer. So that puts us at 10. So 1 swarmer, 4 pawns, 3 knights, 1 bishop. Cool. So now we can kind of break the mold with this area because this is the optional zone, and you can see that the difficulty of 6 is higher than the difficulty for any of the other zones. So we have all these enemies present in the last zone, and I can also just make the pawns and stuff inherently more difficult. Like, they take more hits to kill, the swarmers take more hits to kill. But it's also my opportunity to make it more interesting too. So there's 2 bishops, there's 3 knights there. Let's think about it. We could do something similar where we have lots of swarmers at the start. Like you said, like mosquitoes are cool. So we'll have swarmer. And because this area is more difficult, we could totally have the whole bishop knight rook thing right at the start, or at least mostly. And what would make this place seem scary too is if one of the first things you see when you get into the zone is a rook right in your face. So I'm going to actually do that as a note, because that's kind of a way to be like, oh shit! And then when you try to kill it and it like kind of kicks your ass, that shows you that this place is tough. This is why I have my file so freaking huge, so I can write all these detailed notes. That one. Swear it'd be nice if I had a beastly computer. Oh yeah, I started up a Gaimoria ad on Facebook again. Except I'm gonna have it just be like $5 a day consistently forever. So I think that comes out to like $150 a month, and that's the lowest I could have it. Just to try and generate some page clicks, because our patron has literally just stopped getting any new people at all for the past like 2-3 weeks. So I'm hoping that if I just throw $5 a day at advertising, which all again is tax deductible, that it would at least bring in a couple people new a month or something. The only way it's going to do any better is if it somehow goes viral and then we get like 1,000 people giving us $1, $2, or $3 a month, which would be super awesome. And that would give us like $2,000 to $3,000 a month. And then this could be officially my full-time job, but I can't hold my breath for something to go viral. It's just not realistic. Let's see here. We'll have a swarmer, probably 2 pawns, because that's what you need. And again, like I can make this more difficult just with how I place them. So I may have 2 kinds of pawns in here, but I might have it more populated with rooks and knights. So, you know, I could actually just make this more difficult already by having it start out with 2 knights. Wait, why am I selecting that? But so yeah, we can start out with the rook right in your face, and then we can have a more dense population of like knights and stuff. So we definitely want to bring the bishop in already here. Probably go with a new additional swarmer. Bring in an additional pawn. Or 2 different pawns. So these could be 2 brand new. Have a new swarmer. And time-wise, the stuff is actually pretty good because, you know, maybe it feels like it's taking a while during the stream, but in the grander scheme of things, when I work on something like this, like 6 to 8 hours a day, by the time I'm done doing this, and like the stream shows everything I've done, like I've only spent like 2.5-3 hours on this map so far, and it's just loaded with notes. So you know, maybe when this thing is done, it will have only taken me about 8 hours, so it's like, took me 1 day's worth of work just to kind of make this up. And that 1 day's worth of work and thinking might save me a lot of time down the line when I'm trying to start playtesting this stuff after creating the enemies and putting them in, and I was trying to think about, oh, what kind of things was I supposed to put in here? So, you know, 1 day's worth of prep work for this kind of stuff, and it's fun. You know, it could save me a lot of time down the line. We'll keep the rook. Keep these two. I have a new one though. So now we're up to 3 knights. So now we have knight AB, knight BC. This will be pawn AB and pawn CD. Former A and now that's probably a better way to do that than just saying like a new knight. I'm gonna do that. Let's waste way less work. So we'll have B bigger. C. A. B. What are we at? We're just shy of 2 hours. I could pretty much just wrap up this forest zone and call it done for today. Cool. Well, thank you for showing your friends and family. I'm glad that they are liking how it's turning out. A and B, B and C. This will be B and C again. A and B. This will be A and A. Or no. Let's have it be B for the rook. Bishop A, rook B. So that means we'll have a new rook. I won't delete the previous note that I wrote because, you know, additional labeling never hurts. Yeah, we have a new knight for this zone. We have 2 new pawns for this zone. We have a new swarm for this zone. So that means we will have a new rook. We got 2 swarmers, 2 pawns, 2 knights, a bishop, and a rook. So, for the final zone, we're going to have the 2 swarmers. We have a total of 3 pawns. You'd add one more pawn. We have 3 rooks, yeah. A, B, C. We'll have 2 rooks as well. Have an A. So the fun thing for me too is now that I'm like kind of planning this stuff out, that gives me like the perfect excuse to start sketching these ideas all out, thinking now that it's like, okay, so if I want to have this many enemies for this zone, now I can start sketching this stuff out. So we're gonna have like 2 kinds of swarmers, so I'll like start researching and thinking, you know, maybe mosquitoes will be like one kind of swarmer, then maybe like a bunch of like rats or snakes or, you know, something will be the other kind of swarmer. But it like makes it more fun for me to start drawing and sketching things when I have a little bit of game design that backs it. So now that I'm making this plan for the game design of like this zone will have this and it will have this, then that makes it more fun for me. And be like, oh yeah, this will be like one of the 2 rooks I was planning on having. It's whoops, that's supposed to be. It's why people like to give names to characters they draw, or they like doing fan art, because to me, or like if you give lore, or you like work on a project that's kind of carried from one art piece to the next art piece to the next art piece, but they all fit like a theme, that is more appealing to me, and I know why other people are drawn to it, because it gives more meaning to what you're drawing, as opposed to like the kinds of people that just draw like hot naked chicks all the time. Like, you know, if they want to do that, fine. But if there's like no theme to it, or like the naked chicks aren't connected in any way, and they just want to draw the naked chicks and like they're just not connected, to me that's like super boring. And it's no different than this. Like, I enjoy drawing cool creatures and stuff, but if I know they're part of a set, like I know that I have these 11 or 12 some creatures I gotta draw as a set, then that makes me more excited, because then I start thinking about how the creatures like look in relation to one another, and then in relation to the zone that they're in. So then that inspires me to um, get references and all that stuff. So it's like a way to make your work more fun. So that's why I've kind of been doing this, you know, part 1 for, you know, writing a bunch of notes for myself, and part 2 because it's fun. Like, if it's not fun, what's the point? So let's see, is this accurate? So ABC knight, ABC, then we have an A, and then we have an AB, and A, B, C. Oh, I added a new pawn. But no new, nothing else. Is that it? I did a new rook, right? I kind of blew all my load here. Like, I had everything new and cool here, which means if you get to here, then you're not really facing anything new, which is kind of lame. So maybe I'll just have the rook be the same. have a new knight. A, B, C, so one new pawn. Knight. Not doing it. Rook. A, B. We have A, B, C, D, and we have all three of those. That should be fine. Because then we'll see them in different mixes. We'll just get one new pawn and one new rook. Which makes this good because then with my 3 knights, like, you know, I'll have, same with the other areas, so I'll have them together in interesting combos. So what is this? 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now I'm kind of creating this list of a bestiary that I need to create. Two swarmers. 4 pawns. 3 knights. 1 bishop and 2 rook. It's 12 total. So, yeah, I'm gonna have a big... I'm gonna have a big list of creatures and stuff to make for this game. This actually hasn't even touched the autumn lands here. Well, we don't have a boss, so I can get rid of this. I don't want to have any... I could have bishops by themselves. I don't want to have any rooks. Maybe, yeah, a couple pawns, a couple swarmers. So this will just... Grasslands will be loaded with pawns. Like 1 knight. So it's easy. We'll have one... We'll have 1 swarmer. 3 pawns. 1 knight. Actually, we want to have plenty of pawns here, so we'll have like 5 pawns. We don't want to have other, like, more complex units. We just want to have stupid units. So lots of pawns. So grasslands wood, we have 4. Let's do 5. So it's kind of unique. So kind of the same. So the only reason this zone would be a little bit harder is because there's a swarmer and a bishop. But again, they probably won't all be like clustered together, so it won't be too hard. Let's see here. Almost at 2 hours. Do you guys want me to keep going? I don't think I'm really going to go past 2 hours because, again, like, I want to be able to break this up into parts for the YouTube stuff. So, if you guys have any questions, you should ask me and I'll answer them. Other than that, I feel like I'm probably just going to continue doing this, but not record it all because I don't want this to have like a crazy long YouTube video. There is not a leveling system. Nope. It's not an RPG. It's like Zelda. Zelda does not have leveling. And respawn timers. Zelda creatures respawn based off of you being 2 screens worth of distance away. And I think Secret of Mana is the same. Actually, just test that real quick. So yeah, respawn will be based off of your location. Obviously, this game is much more RPG because it has like equipment and leveling and all that stuff and damage numbers, which is not going to be like Gaimoria. My main influence for Secret of Mana is just how pretty it is, and like I love this music. Sit there, stuff back. Yeah, my Secret of Mana inspirations are purely visual and audio. Okay, so I cleared out the enemies in this. Oh, it's not. Okay, so these things just. I don't know if they respawned because they just were off screen, or if because there's actually like a total of 6 wolves for this spot, and they can only show like 2 or 3 at a time because of the Super Nintendo memory restriction. So, obviously this place is now clear. And I think if I go back to town and come back in, they'll be here. But we'll see if I walk to this... Oh wait, over here. Oh, I thought that was the end of the screen. I'm not convinced that these things keep respawning, so I don't remember that. I think it's just like... I think it's a Super Nintendo limit, like they can only show so many at a time. So which is why, when I left and I came back, it hadn't filled its full quota to spawn enemies. Because of its memory limitation, it couldn't spawn, you know, maybe 4 or 5 at a time. It could only spawn 2 or 3 at a time. So this area is now clear. And, oh, no, it's not clear. Oh, this was the end. So this is weird with the old classic camera. You don't know if you're at the end of the screen or not. Just don't want to go in the next zone and ruin it. I'm pretty sure that's the next area because of how it's outlined with the crystals. Yeah, I know, I love this music. Secret of Mana is so good. You can tell that like the kind of peaceful sounds I'm going with in Gaimoria very much reflect this game. Okay, so this is all clear. No respawn timers. They don't come back. You have to leave the zone and come back. I'm not... Oh, this is Santa Claus' zone. Well, that kind of breaks it, because now that I know if I go to a town and come back, they'll all be back. So yes, they're back. But anyways, that kind of answers your question. That's pretty much my thought is, no, there's no leveling, and to respawn will be based off of, how far away you go and then come back. So it won't be like an MMO where you can sit there and wait 10 seconds and then the mob respawns in front of your face. It will not. Well, it may. May or may not be like that, but there's no XP. And if they do spawn in your face, it would be subtle and at a slow rate, because Gaimoria is not a grindy game. It's not a leveling game, so I don't want people to be spending a lot of... if people want to spend time to fight stuff because it's fun, then yeah, fuck yeah, that's awesome, it's cool. But they aren't going to be forced to fight things just because they need to level because they're level blocked, or progression locked because of a level or RPG design balance imperfection. So, yeah, you play Zelda, Super Nintendo, it'll be like that, but you have pets. You have a little reindeer. Kind of walk around, his name's Rudolph. Yeah. I need to help Rudolph get Santa Claus back. I'll do that some other time, though. Alright. Well, thank you guys for coming and watching. I'm just gonna continue working on this map myself, so I don't have the stream go on forever. I'll just have the music play because it's so nice. I'm not gonna have it play because I don't know if that's gonna get muted. So I'm gonna say my goodbye without the music in fear of me getting muted. Yeah, exactly, I agree. Like, same with the Division. Why is there leveling? I don't know. I haven't played it, but to me it seems like they should have just had some other system. Like, leveling in Borderlands made a little bit more sense because they had but yeah, there's like a talent system in Division as well, but whatever. I don't want to get into that when I'm trying to wrap it up. Yeah, so thanks for coming and watching. Glad we were able to get back up to about 5 people, 4, 5, 6 people. Our Friday one, we only had about 2 people. So now that we're back and I'm going to be doing it consistently again, hopefully we can get those numbers back up, and it'd be super cool if we had 10 people watch, and then we had like cool conversations as we were having before we left. So, thanks for watching. Tell your friends to check out our Patreon or check out the game or whatever. And I'm going to stream again Wednesday, because now we're doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So in 2 days we're doing it again, and then we'll have another one on Friday. So you guys will get a whole bunch of me. And you might get tired of me. So that's the end. Thanks for watching. Toodles.